Hi, I'm Kendra Moore, and I'm a PhD student in religious studies at Boston University. So I grew up in a conservative family and culture and attended mostly conservative creationist schools throughout my childhood and high school years. And at the time, I didn't really think very much about that at all. I liked science. I just kind of took for granted, like everyone else that I grew up with and around, that you had a literal interpretation of the Genesis creation story, and that's just the way that we understood the world. And so I show up at college and started taking religious studies and theology classes. I started hearing things that sounded really unusual to me, things that I never in a million years thought that I would hear in church. Like you can actually read the Genesis creation story figuratively, metaphorically, and maybe the way that we see the world isn't always the same as everyone else that looks at the world in different ways. And so I just started to ask more questions, and I felt free to ask those questions in ways that I never really felt free to ask questions growing up as a kid or as a high schooler. After college, I decided to go to graduate school, and I ended up getting a master's of theological studies at Boston University. But when I was applying for grad school, I wanted to go somewhere outside of Texas, which is where I grew up, to just see for myself like what it was that was so different about everyone else. Well, I knew that I grew up in this really insular world, surrounded by people who were, for the most part, like-minded. That also was the same experience that a lot of my northern friends were having. My northern friends who grew up in northern families with northern friends who believed more progressive things collectively, and maybe had never even had a conservative Christian friend, or never even knew a Republican. And so it was this really interesting moment of realizing that there is no such thing as like one American culture, that there are multiple different modes of education and learning, and that the United States is a big place, and people are very disconnected from one another across state lines, especially. And across the Mason-Dixon line, I realized that I wanted to be part of the community of people who are attempting to build bridges between these divides that we have all across the United States. And I think that part of how that happens is through education. Part of how it happens is through religious congregations. But what everyone has to be willing to do is to grant some moral credit, or to grant some legitimacy to the beliefs and ideas that the other has, just to the extent that we're able to have a conversation. Because I realized that just isn't always possible, and it's very scary actually to be able to admit to yourself that maybe you don't know everything. And so I think that that's been one of the greatest lessons of my own educational journey, is to have the privilege to explore and to travel across the world and across different states in the US. I've just been able to see a lot of different cultural exchanges and experiences that have helped me to understand how difficult it is actually to communicate with one another, but how important it is for us to be able to embody peace and live in really diverse communities. So that's something that I continue to care about academically, but also personally and religiously because of my own upbringing.